Welcome to another episode of War in Ukraine, History in the Making. This war has now been going on for more than 2 months with no end in sight yet. It continues to devastate Ukraine and imperil the wider world. So a very important question for all of us is, where are things headed from here? What's going to happen next in the war? What will the outcome of the war be? What sort of impact will it leave behind on the world? That last one is a big question because whichever way the war ends, it is very unlikely that the world is going back to the way it was before February 2022. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it marked the beginning of a new era. But what that era will be like exactly will depend a great deal upon how this war unfolds. Predicting with confidence the outcome of any war is never easy. What you have to do instead is look at identify a range of possibilities and assess the likelihood. But for the Ukraine war, even this will be difficult because this is uncharted territory for the world. The wars we're familiar with, they all take place in the third world, in poor countries. Ukraine is nothing like that. And this is Europe's first big power conflict since World War II. Europe is now a very different place than it was back then. So today's war in Ukraine is very much an open-ended question. Resolving that question, it depends firstly on knowing the end game for both sides. They still seem undecided, but it's likely Russia will keep fighting until it gains and secures all this territory in southeastern Ukraine, while Ukraine it'll keep fighting until it expels the Russians from its territory. And if it gains the upper hand, not only will it try to retake Donbass, but also might try to retake Crimea, because the Russian presence in both these areas is how the war came about in the first place. Now there is one important factor we have to bear in mind. This is a rather unlimited war. Russia and Ukraine are not attacking each other with full force. Ukraine has barely attacked within Russian territory, and Russia is not fighting a total war, far from it. So also, as the experts tell us, Russia began this war thinking that it was going to be a short and easy conflict, that it would defeat the Ukrainians easily. So that would mean that the Russians intended from the beginning for this to be a small-scale conflict, like what the Russian government is telling its people. And if so, they might want to keep it that way. And one way for a war to be small-scale is for it to be brief. So, and in that way, I identify a likelihood of Russia stopping the fighting sometime soon. But I don't think that will happen right now because Russia is at a stage of its conflict that it seems very committed to. In my last video, I talked about what were the goals Russia was fighting to accomplish in Ukraine. The topic of this video involves, will Russia actually accomplish them? How will its efforts turn out? Now, that will require a lot of military analysis because because much of it is about the fight between Russia and Ukraine. But I will say, I know this: by concentrating on the Donbass, Russia is no longer in danger of having dangerously overextended supply lines, and its troops fighting across the Black Sea coast can be supplied from Crimea and from the sea. On the other hand, and the open areas in the Donbass allow for Russia to fully unleash its superior firepower. On the other hand, the Ukrainians have heavily fortified the Donbass because of the long insurgency, and supplies of effective portable weapons from abroad are increasing in Ukraine, are increasing for Ukraine. So this is going to be a close battle. Also, the aid Ukraine is getting from abroad creates the chance of an escalation of the war, as it might prompt Russia to take action against NATO countries. That's a worrying possibility. But on the other hand, it could also be that it also seems that the longer the Russian body count and the sanctions go on, the more the stability and survival of the Russian government is threatened. So Putin might have an incentive to not let the war go on for long. And that means there might be a ceasefire sometime soon, but whether there will be a negotiated settlement, that is very much uncertain. Stopping an armed conflict is not the same as resolving it. And it could be that when the fighting comes to an end, the border between Ukraine and Russia will continue to be an unstable place, a chaotic place. Russia might keep it that way, so it can continue to project its power. Ukraine is such a big country that Russia could easily sow chaos anywhere inside it, and doing so be able to maintain a foothold inside Ukraine. But even if there is a settlement, it's probably not going to diffuse tensions. The settlement will most likely involve Russia withdrawing from most of the areas it captures, and Ukraine agreeing to be neutral, not joining NATO or the EU, and perhaps maybe even giving up the Donbass. But things are still going to be tense between Russia between Russia and Ukraine and all the other countries. The world now sees what Russia can do, and the Ukrainian people continue to be very angry at Russia. And even if the Ukrainian government, current one, makes itself friendly, stops its feud with Russia, and NATO will continue to militarize. So Europe will continue to be a hostile place, and that could sow and seeds for future conflicts might be sowed. Now, at the same now, and in that regard, this is my broad forecast for what the result of this war will be. Russia has performed poorly in seeking its first objective in the war, and the war has been a very bad, grueling affair for it, and that might lead Russia to change its ways. One way that could happen is for Russia to turn back from its path of being expansionist and belligerent, but another way is that it could simply just improve its capabilities, and there is strong historical precedent for that. After the 1871 Franco-Prussian War, Europe settled in for a long period of peace, during which the Second Industrial Revolution happened. Then, when Europe went to war, and when all of Europe went to war in 1914, they did not know what they were getting into. They did not know how to fight a war with all the new technology they had, and so the World War I was a debacle. After World War I ended, the Europeans, they improved their capability, and so later they started World War II and were able to effectively fight it. Ever since World War II ended, Europe once more has been in a long period of peace, during which the third industrial revolution, and even a fourth industrial revolution, one with the internet and all, the sort of thing that would turn us into wimps. And that is probably why when Russia started this war in Ukraine in 2022, it did not know what it was going into. It performed very badly, but now Russia is learning, and that means that it might it might change and become its ways to become a more formidable foe. It can do that by simply expanding its military strength, but it could also do that by finding alternative ways of pursuing its designs on Ukraine and its campaign against a Western-oriented Europe. Like there's so many ways we could find in hybrid warfare, which is all in vogue these days. And Russia might do such things even if it's currently defeated, if it's right now defeated in Ukraine, and if the sanctions continue on, and many other countries might follow Russia's lead. And that might be the main way this war changes the world, while leaving behind a more dangerous Europe. So this has been my introductory lecture on what to expect, and really it's been raising questions more than it's been giving answers. Hopefully my upcoming videos will have some clear answers to give regarding the conflict, but I will end on this very important note. There is nothing worse for the modern world than war, but a decline in war is being noticed as time goes on all across the world. But now the world is becoming a tense place, and Russia's war in Ukraine has is shattering hopes that this trend will continue and is suggesting that the world is reverting to a more warlike state. But which direction the world goes from here depends not on, it is not the outbreak of war in Ukraine that will determine which direction the world goes from here. It is how the war unfolds, and that will be decided a great deal by how the world responds to the war, because world peace is not ensured by having every country be ruled by those who act in the best interests of peace, but by global cooperation and a strong international order geared towards collectively managing problems in any part of the world. This war in Ukraine is simply a challenge for the international community, one unlike any they have ever faced before, and it remains to be seen whether they will make the right decisions in handling this crisis.